Welcome back. I'm going to cover my January reads, how they made me feel, and whether I would recommend them. And I'm going to take them in order from my lowest star rating to my highest star rating. Plus, I'm going to give you a one sentence, spoiler free summary to let you know what to expect from these books so you can decide if it's something that you're interested in. And just for reference, I'm going to pop my star rating right here on the screen so you can have a bit of context to how I rate my books. And I am an aggressive DNFer. If I feel like a book is going to be lower than 3 stars, I usually DNF it. So it's going to be rare that I share with you a book that's lower than 3 stars. All right, enough of the yapping. Let's get to the books. The Lawyer's Game by Cole Baxter follows a douchebag of a lawyer who is on a weekend snow trip in the mountains with his friends, and he's put on this kind of faux courtroom scenario to answer for some things he may or may not have done in his past. This is my 4th Cole Baxter, and of the 4 that I've read, I struggled with this one a bit just because our main character is so awful. His inner monologue of his entitlement, just the complete lack of self-awareness, and sheer arrogance just made me rage read the first half of this book. And the only reason I would rate it a little lower than that, not necessarily because we have such an unlikable character, it's simply because I would say his inner monologue was like the first half of the book, and I felt like that went on a little bit longer than it needed to. But once we move kind of past that, this was a page turner that I couldn't put down. So if you're a fan of quick popcorn thrillers with unlikable characters like Frida McFadden, which I am, then I think that you would enjoy Cole Baxter's writing. And if you're okay with stories that skip the character development, then you'll like this. On the flip side, you may want to skip this if you need some kind of character to root for in this story, and if you prefer character depth, because that's just not here. It's just not that type of story. And for me, I like some character depth, so that's why this one wasn't rated higher, but still an effective story. Next is Day by Day Armageddon. This is a survivalist thriller in the zombie apocalypse, told from the POV of a deserter soldier. I have to admit, I had higher hopes for this one, but the sheer amount of conveniences in this story just to keep it moving along just really killed the stakes for me. I mean, this guy just happened to have all of the perfect skill set, all of the perfect access for him to be able to navigate this exploding world full of zombies. And there was also, I think, a real missed opportunity to weigh in on the emotional aspect, because we find out at the very beginning of this story that this guy is a deserter. And to lean into that fear just wasn't really discussed that much. So if you can appreciate a more tactical thriller in a zombie setting that's focused in a journal format, then you would like this. And if you don't mind someone who's just a bit too lucky for comfort, then go for it. On the flip side, if you're looking for a story that has more realistic stakes that don't really come easy, or you're looking for characters with some emotional depth and investment, then you might want to skip this. So Yard Work by David Koepp is about a grumpy, lonely, grieving old judge who is facing this unsettling force on his property. This was a quick and fun audiobook. It didn't blow my mind, but it was still enjoyable for what it was. I really like shorter stories that have characters that I end up cheering for, even if I don't know a lot about them. And this was definitely one of those. So if you like quick and eerie books, then you love this. But if you want a deeply developed horror story that gives you answers, then you may want to skip this. Extinction Game is another sci-fi thriller about surviving alternate Earths while dodging these corporate conspiracies. So with this book, even though I enjoyed it, I wanted a little more story about the alternate Earths and what those conditions are like, because I'm just a space nut. I'm constantly watching what goes on in space videos and documentaries. And I thought that this would be awesome. Parallel Earths, multiverses, all of that. But this one leaned a bit more into the corporate and political intrigue, and it leans more into a mystery format about what happens to a character prior to the start of this book. So not bad at all. It just wasn't what I was craving. But the writing was fast paced, the characters were interesting enough, and I thought the concepts were unique, and I just would have loved to have seen more. So if you're a fan of high stakes action and mystery, you like the idea of a multiverse but lean more towards corporate with a twist, go for it. But if you were like me and you were hoping for deep world building around alternate Earths and what that could look like, then you may want to skip this. Slewfoot by Brom is this dark historical fiction about witchcraft, vengeance, and I'd say transformation. This is my third read of his, and this falls in line with his consistent format of following two main characters on two different paths. Now, while I appreciate that effort to build a more robust world without getting too complicated, I do feel like those alternate POVs just didn't have space to develop enough. And kind of moving between them pulled me out of the momentum of those stories each and every time. I still really enjoyed this, the eerie atmosphere, the good for her moments, and the way it blended horror with fantasy. And this is really not a critique, it's just this author's writing style. But I think I would have preferred a little more cohesion between our two main characters earlier on in the story. I think it just would have made the ending hit all the more. So if you love a good blend of horror and fantasy, and if you love a good for her moment, you have to read this. But if you're expecting a more tight horror story, instead of something more sprawling and maybe a bit more surface, I'm not gonna say skip this. I'm just gonna say don't go into this expecting that. Stranded was a short, funny, wild, adventurous audiobook featuring some very vibrant narrators. Yes, it's called Stranded, but to me, it was really a story about friendship, nostalgia, and all of the things kind of left unsaid as friends grow up and apart. I'll be honest with you, I listened to this one just because of the narrators Tracy Ellis Ross and Taraji P. Henson. It just really brought these characters to life. But there was a lot of yelling because it was just a high stakes story, but it was really very engaging and it added in a layer of fun mystery. So if you like humorous and fast-paced stories about friendship, then you'll love this. But if you think that loud, exaggerated, very emotional, big narration would be a problem for you, then you might want to skip this. Some of these stories were so good, I had to listen to them twice. Human Sacrifices was a collection of short stories. They were speculative. The horror is more psychological and thought-provoking rather than being overtly gory, which I appreciated. And the ambiguous storytelling just left just enough for you to wonder, which I loved. I think having stories that stick with you and just leave something up to interpretation at the end are the ones that are the most memorable. So if you do like those kind of eerie, thought-provoking horror stories with social commentary that's not so much in your face, you're gonna love this. But if you prefer kind of neatly wrapped up narratives with very clear explanations, then you'll want to skip this. A Closed and Common Orbit by Becky Chambers was a character-driven sci-fi that really loudly explored themes of identity and autonomy throughout. I really enjoyed the emotional depth here with this small, but I think powerful cast. The relationships felt real even in this kind of fantasy sci-fi setting. So if you like introspective sci-fi with some good character development here, then you'll love this. If you're looking for something that's more action-packed and really technical or hard science, then you'll want to skip this. Clearly, I have a theme for dark fantasy here because here's another dark fantasy novella, The Lies of the Ajungo. This was dark and adventurous and surprisingly complete for just under 90 pages. I was a bit nervous that I wouldn't feel like this was a full story because when you think of fantasy, you think of robust. But I felt like this story was exactly as long as it needed to be. It was concise, it was powerful, and it was gripping. So if you can appreciate a compact, well-crafted fantasy story, then pick this up. But if you don't prefer shorter books that don't delve into every detail and don't answer every question, then you may want to skip this. Lakewood by Megan Giddings. This is a slow burn horror novel that really explores medical exploitation of the poor and underserved. This is really a creepy horror about unethical drug trials and really about like the societal imbalances underneath all of that. Our protagonist's desperation and kind of like this slow realization that she really doesn't have control over what's happening to her, even though she has an awareness of it, really made me feel helpless right along with her and angry. And what's even scarier is that this story is inspired by real world atrocities. So again, if you like unsettling societal commentary in your horror stories, you'll want to pick this one up. But skip it if you prefer a more action-driven story because it is more introspective, and more of a character-driven story. This book chilled me to my bones. Let's talk about the terror. This thick-ass book by Dan Simmons that I couldn't put down. This is a historical horror thriller that follows the ill-fated Franklin expedition in the 1800s through the Arctic Circle. They faced starvation, they faced madness, and a mysterious entity that was haunting them throughout. The atmosphere was so immersive. I felt like I was there with them, with its bone-biting cold, its lack of technology, the effects of improper nutrition, exhaustion beyond knowledge. And despite its really hefty page count, I was completely engrossed. And this is a book that I felt its slow pacing really contributed to the isolation and the horror. So if you can appreciate a dense and immersive atmospheric horror that is purely character driven, then you have to read this. And I use the audiobook. I bounce between the audio and the physical copy to keep making progress on it. The audiobook is great. But if slow burn narratives and long books are going to be a struggle for you, then maybe skip this. But I would recommend this story for everybody. I love this. All the Lonely People by Gayle was a heartfelt novel about loneliness, community, and mental health. This book broke me in the best way possible. It follows a lonely widower, Hubert, and how he gets second chance through community with his neighbors. And this story is often compared to A Man Called Ove by Frederick Bachman. And having read both of those stories, I could not disagree more. Beyond the trope or the theme of a widower and found family in his community, those stories differ so much from there. We go deep into Hubert's background, his family, his friendships, and how he became the lonely and isolated person that he has become. And we also explore a little bit more in his community because all of these characters are also dealing with their own layers of loneliness. This book made tears fall from my eyes for the first time in many years. And I cannot shout from the rooftops enough that everyone should be reading this book. So if you love deeply moving characters with found family themes, then you're going to love this. And I don't think anybody should skip it. Everybody needs to read this. Next up is Wonder. And this is a middle grade book about a wonderful little boy named Augie who has to navigate this world with some severe disfigurations and how he navigates school and self-acceptance. My daughter recommended this book to me after she checked it out from the library and loved it. And I just love this book so much. I just did not expect it to offer what it did. And I had not seen the movie. The characters were amazing, even sometimes frustrating. And the family dynamic was beautiful. This was such an inspiring read, and it was a reminder for me as mostly an adult fiction reader to go explore the middle grade section. So if you do like stories about kindness, uplifting, and I'd say resilience, then please don't write this one off just because it's middle grade. But if you know that middle grade is not for you, even though I was just giving it a try, then you would like to skip this. And lastly, this gripping dark fantasy, The Warded Man by Peter V. Brett, had me in a chokehold. And when I say a chokehold, it means I was only reading this book. I am typically a multiple book juggler, but I could not part ways with this until I finished it. This starts off this epic fantasy series around 3 children growing up in a post-apocalyptic world where demons attack nightly. So imagine this setting after us, after the age of science and technology and medicine, and going back to the dark ages, but with demons at night. The setting, the characters, the character arcs, the tension, the stakes, I felt it in every single chapter. Like, I know I'm sharing with you my January read, but I've already finished book 2 and I've started book 3. So again, if you like dark post-apocalyptic fantasy and you appreciate strong character development, then you got to pick this up. But skip this if you don't like stories that have strong themes of misogyny. And I would say multiple instances of rape. When I say this is dark, it is dark, friend. Just because it's a fantasy, you'll want to check your content warnings. Those are my January reads and ratings. Let me know in the comments if you've read any of these. And I also want to know what your favorite read of January was. If any of these sound interesting to you, let me know which ones you've added to your TBR. And I'll see you in the next video.